Thanks a lot for coming. My name's Andy Crutchfield. I just tapped my mic. I won't do that again. I work for the professional services team. I'm a consultant for Looker. And I'm going to talk to you about tools for training your team. A little bit about my background. Before working at Looker, I was the head of data products at a company in Tanzania called Off-Grid Electric. We produced and distributed solar home systems for the mass market, like 3 to 6 lights, phone charging, mostly to displace the use of kerosene as a lighting source. In order to do this, we needed a large workforce spread out over Tanzania, over 1,000 people. And in order to manage those operations, we were heavily reliant on software and data to do so. At first, this was fine. We had teams and systems, and everything went pretty well. But soon we grew to be quite large, and it was no longer possible to do a lot of the things we really needed to do. More and more of the questions for daily business operations came to the data analyst team. And so our office looked something like this. And it was not nice. If you read the keynote, you've seen this before if you've listened to any of our marketing material. But it was true. I really lived this. The unhappiness of my friends that were leading the business, that needed these things to run their departments, and then the stress that me and my team felt because we wanted to answer these questions, and there just wasn't enough time in the day. I'm seeing some nods. I'm sure many of you have felt this before as well. So we needed to find a way to either get more people, which wasn't going to happen, or to enable this line of folks to answer their own questions. So we ended up getting Looker, and big, hey, this is great, right? But I'm not here to sell Looker, right? You can buy Looker, but that's not the whole story. You have to be able to enable these people to do the sort of analysis and depth of work that you previously could only do with writing SQL. And without having to teach these folks how to write SQL and all the things about your database. And the key to this is enablement. And we're going to talk about some of the goals of that. But yeah, underlying it all is really, it's great to give your end users more access to data. But really, don't you just want to be able to work on more interesting things? And really, if you use that to motivate you and push that sort of enablement concept, you'll be in good shape. And that's why I say that it's both a way to get for your end users to get more value, but also a sales pitch, so that analysis that was usually back and forth between your business leaders and the analyst team can be converted into them in the Explore interface, and you curating that data platform for them to use, as well as working on more advanced data analytics and moving your company forward. So how do we do that? Lots of ways, right? It's not just going to be one training session that you hold. Again, you want to take every opportunity to push this adoption across your company. One that many clients have found to be successful is to build a data dictionary. This is just some repository of information about the fields in your Looker instance outside of Looker. Like maybe, okay, here's the fields we just added in the last 30 days and some descriptions about them. Or like for some sort of strategic initiative, we added these. If you're in this department, look at these things. If you're a new hire, hey, these 50 things are really what you need to know. People have found a lot of success with that. I went off-grid. I love to send emails hyping new reports as if I was getting them stoked for a cool ski trip I was planning. Right? Like, hey, look at this cool thing I just spent like all night on. Like, how great is this? Like, more than just the person that asked me about this must be interested, right? So provide some background. What was the initial request? Well, what data did it come from? What were the holes in that data that you should keep in mind when you're analyzing it? And most importantly, some questions that I would like to see people ask of that, and some sort of seeds of thought on how to explore it further. You can also make some videos. Looker's got some on our website, like how to create a dashboard, how to create a look. And we're building more of these 2-minute style videos actively right now. I've also seen some customers build their own, like a 2-minute webcast, simple, nothing fancy, of like, hey, here's a little navigation of our main Explore, or here's how to save your first dashboard, things like that, really simple. But inevitably, some part of your training plan will be to have a classroom session. So I want to spend some time talking about that today. I think it's applicable across the board. So the first thing is, before it ever starts, you want to prepare for the big day. If this is your sales pitch to change the data culture at your company, then you need to make it a big splash. Like, this is going to be the most people you have in an audience probably at any time. So you want to make sure to book the meeting room, and get it on people's calendars a couple weeks in advance. Don't be running from another meeting and fiddling with the audio video right when it starts. Make sure the right people are there to attend. It's your big splash. One time, a client planned it at the same time as the Cinco de Mayo party, and half the people left in the middle of it, right? I mean, that's not the big splash you're looking for, right? The other thing is, when they leave that training, they will need to be able to understand your instance. So save some engaging content in your instance, something that's going to attract them back, as well as making approachable explorers. This image is of the actual Explore dropdown, but even more important is that field picker. That's the environment that they're going to be in the most often. Make it a learning environment where you've got description parameters, labels that are something that someone on their second day that's fiddling through Looker while they're being ignored by their manager, that person should be able to look through your Looker instance and learn something about how you analyze data at your company. Next, you actually start the training, right? And I've made this mistake before, actually internally at Looker. We work at a BI company. Obviously, business intelligence is important, right? But at the end, someone raises their hand. They're like, so why would I want to use this, really? And I'm like, oh, no. You just sat through an hour of training, and no way they were as engaged as they could have been if you've not, again, kind of established the value ahead of time. So we were kicking around ideas at a Looker-hosted training a couple days ago, and it's really going to be custom for every company. Maybe talk about a big decision that was recently made and the data that went behind making that strategic decision. Or look at the people in the room and say, these people are compelled by this sort of data. Talk about how you can find that there. Make it personal. And then you'll want to launch into some general navigation of Looker. There's really two areas of Looker that are distinct for your Explorer-type users. First is the content access in the Spaces area, which you get to by going to the Browse button. It's all sort of the same thing, really. I like to explain it as a Google Drive type folder structure where your content is saved. So stuff that someone's built before and is saved here. You can talk about the left side there and other parts, but most important is how they should be engaging with this folder structure that you've set up ahead of time. Which departments have the ability to view and which departments have the ability to save in each of these different folders. How they should approach, maybe save stuff in your own folder and then move it there once it's sort of agreed upon. Set this up so you're not cleaning up a mess a year later. Then you want to actually walk through a dashboard. Again, I look at a dashboard, I'm like, oh, obviously this is how you navigate it. But not everyone's that way. Some interesting things are the filters area. These will affect more than one tile in your dashboard. You can click on a measure and show how the drill overlay works. Hide stuff by clicking on one of those legend values. Clicking on one of those ellipses next to those brands will take you outside of Looker to another location. The run button, got to teach them the run button. Simple as that. Make it feel comfortable and not mystical. Like, why isn't everything new? Well, click the run button and it'll be new. But most importantly, this is where most of your end users will first access the Explore interface. And you'll want to show them that pattern. So if you click on one of these tiles and click Explore from here, they'll be starting in an Explore instead of from scratch, which is not as approachable as something that's been curated by someone on the data team, something that they can trust. So you bring them to the Explore interface that way. And a quick orientation here. I call the left side the field picker. You've got the filters area on top, the visualization editor in the middle, and the results set on the bottom. Again, a run button. But the most important thing here is how to use those fields in the field picker. Right? What's a dimension? What's a measure? And instead of trying to do that on your full million-row data set, we suggest that you try and learn the fundamentals with a more approachable data set, like a basket of fruit. So this is a real data training that our founder, Lloyd Tabb, gives at the new hire training still. I think he uses markers sometimes, but originally it was a basket of fruit. And I want to give it to you and show you some tips on how to make these, because you're teaching a bunch of non-technical users how to basically write SQL, right? This is a challenging thing. So how can we learn group by, select in an approachable way? So this is not the full training, but it's available after this session for download. Okay, so welcome. we're going to learn about dimensions, and we're going to use this basket of fruits. So when we want to analyze our data, we first need to see the data, right? And if we select a dimension, what Looker is going to do in your database is to create different groups for each value of that dimension. So in our fruit type dimension, we have bananas and oranges and apples and lemons and limes, right? And so we'll make piles for each of these types of fruit. And then we see, okay, this pile is oranges, so we get orange. Pile is apples, apples. So both the group by clause and the select clause, for those of you that know SQL, right? Next, what if we want to do some sort of, it's also helpful to call these categories, some people. What if we add another dimension to the mix? Will I get all of my different colors and all my different fruit types? Actually, Looker combines these two together and produces the unique values of combinations of those two dimensions. So in this case, we still get yellow lemons and yellow bananas, but we now get green apples and red apples, and those split into two, getting 6 results instead of 5. A general rule of thumb here is that the more dimensions you add, the larger your result set will be, the more rows. Measures. Anytime you're doing some sort of data analysis, inevitably you'll need to do some sort of math, counting, summing, averaging, and that's going to be a measure, right? Pretty straightforward, some type of math. When we do just a measure by itself, we take all of our data, and we take a look at it, and then we perform that measure type, right? So in this case, count. We go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 items of fruits. We could also weigh all those 12 items and get the total weight or the average price. Ideally, someone asks you, well, I want to do that by category. And you're like, well, I'm glad you asked, because you can do that with Looker. Just add a dimension. Adding a dimension allows you, measures can describe these dimension values. The keyword is by each. If I want to know this count of fruit by each fruit type, well, first thing I do is apply my dimension. Again, we're familiar with this. 5 piles of fruits. Okay, so that's step 1. Step 2 is I do that same count measure, but I do it once per each pile. I do 1, 2. I do 1 count over here. A count of 2 limes, 3 lemons, and so on. Same measuring action, but I'm doing it once per row of my result set. Now let's get a little deeper. If we want to start filtering, this is usually you can either filter on a dimension or a measure. I find that teaching filtering dimensions is pretty straightforward. Most people are used to using the auto filter in Excel or deleting rows from something. Best to describe this as removing stuff from the raw data. Right? So I can take this and say, hey, I only want to look at the round fruits. So I take all my not round fruits, all these lemons and bananas and limes, and I just get them out of the way. They're filtered out of the raw data. And then I do my dimensioning and measuring. So I take my fruit types and split them up, and then I count them. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So filtering on dimensions happens before the dimensioning and measuring. If we filter on a measure, this is one of the harder concepts, and you'll see that when you start to practice, because we've got some practice afterwards, that these are a little harder to understand. And the reason is because this happens after the dimensioning and measuring has been done. Because if you look at your data, there's no count of fruit anywhere in your data set. Right? First, Looker has to produce that result set and then apply the filter. So in this case, we have all of our data, and we do just like we've been doing, where we have our 5 fruits, and we count each one. But then we apply the filter, and we see that our apples have 3, so they don't get to stay, and our lemons have 3, so they don't get to stay. Only these results get to remain. The reason this is tricky is because the same fruit basket count is equal to 2 will work differently if we change the dimension from fruit type into color. Right? And this is just hard to understand. Also, you don't even need the count to be in the result set to filter on it, sort of a mind bender as well. But with some practice, it usually goes okay. Pivots, I almost never spend very much time on pivots. Pivots are a dimension. Next slide, no. They can be confusing because pivoting in Excel and other BI tools actually does something. But in Looker, it's just a dimension, but it creates a different visual orientation of the same data as if it were just a dimension instead of a pivoted dimension. So pivots, dimensions, same thing in terms of the data. It's only useful for visualizations. No exceptions. Okay, so at this point, I've been talking at you for a while. Thank you, you're a great audience. At this point, you need to re-engage with your audience a little bit. And a great way to do this is with some practice. And these concepts, dimensions, measures, it's easier to sit through this. But when you start really, and this is why being an analyst is a hard work, right? It's solving these word problems and wrangling those into SQL, or in our case, into the Explorer interface. That's the real challenge of our jobs. So going through some simple practice, there's 9 questions we have on the full training, can go a long way to re-engage and drive these concepts home. At this point, the training usually takes about an hour to go through that sort of setup and the fundamentals. But then you want to extend this into more of a real-world training. Make it feel like real life. Go to a real, step on these. Go to a real Explorer that's something helpful, that's really going to be useful for them. Don't create some sort of subset Explorer that's only useful for training, but it's on your real data. Make it feel like real life. But keep it simple as well. Like start with just one measure, and then add a filter, and then maybe add a dimension. And we've got some material that you can basically use as a template and copy off of that. But I end this with this I do, we do, you do concept. This is one of my colleagues, Katie Gillespie. She's an account executive. Used to be a grade school teacher, and she taught me this. It's a teaching pattern. First, I do. I sort of demonstrate something I want you to learn, right? Then we do together, where I say, hey, let's produce the last quarter's results of orders, and let's now break that up by state, right? And we sort of do all this together. Maybe I give you time to do self-work, but I'm teeing up the questions, right? But that's not the situation that your end users will be in when they're doing their analysis. So set that up. Say, okay, this is your turn. Think of some question you'd want to ask the data you've been dying to do. Now that you've got Looker access, you can. And let's do it. And ideally, you have some members of your analytics team walking around the room facilitating that exploration. Having this happening in a facilitated environment, you can't overstate how important that is for adoption and learning. Towards the end of your training, you'll want to just sort of ending it, and with the buzzer, it happens a lot actually. I'm guilty of this as well. But you want to have some time at the end to look into the future. You are hopefully teeing up a new relationship between your analyst team and your company's end users, right? And you want to set this up. A good place, first you want to kind of lure them back in, right? Steer them to content that's going to be relevant for them. But also kick off some processes for how you're going to interact. Hey, instead of sending me a request for something, start with an explore and say hey, this is what I tried, but I don't know what field to pick next for this and this, right? And that way you have sort of a collaborative language couched right in your database and a place that you're most likely going to have to go make edits to. And so it's nice to know you're on the same page. Also, provide them some line to provide you feedback on when they want to add fields to the field picker, or if something's confusing, how do we approach that, right? Open those lines. This last one's really important. I feel like in every department, in every training, there will be at least a few people who want to go deeper. Once they have a command of this Explore interface, maybe they're using, I like to tell a story of an old colleague who was in marketing, had no code experience at all. But she was able to learn how to use the tier dimension and I taught her LookML, and she was able to push code and change those tiers so she could cohort on different values when she was trying to determine pricing, right? And she didn't have to learn explorers and all this other stuff, how to edit them. But being able to spend 20 minutes with her stopped me having to get on email at 8 p.m., 9 p.m. as she was preparing this board meeting presentation, right? So you want to spread that power as wide as you can in your organization. So don't be afraid of your end users learning some LookML, or all of it. Why not? Okay, so I'm basically done. I've got all these resources are available on a link to join. I'm going to build a decent discourse article right afterwards, and hopefully I'll make it a little longer as it goes on. But you can find the data set there and some other methods for teaching in this deck. I also want to pitch, we have this fruit basket training along with that template. It's like a randomly generated e-commerce data set that goes through some measures and small analytical patterns like that. We run that every Wednesday as a way to do like an initial training before running your official one on your data, right? They can come to the webinar and then have a more focused training at your site. And with that, I don't know if we have time for questions, but yeah, thanks.